Hello, and welcome. Welcome everyone to Alta Live and today's conversation with Kevin Kelly. I see the Zoom room filling up. I am so excited that all of you are joining us today for what I hope and I know will be some great words of wisdom from a really wise yet very humble gentleman. So welcome. Today's guest, Kevin Kelly, he's the senior maverick at Wired magazine, a magazine he actually co-founded in 1993 and served as the executive editor for his first 7 years. His book, The Inevitable, is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, and his current book, Excellent Advice for Living, was released this month. He is the founder of the popular Cool Tools website, which has been reviewing tools daily for 20 years. And he was from 1984 to 1990. Kevin was publisher and editor of the Whole Earth Review. I'm sure many of our Alta readers are familiar with Whole Earth. In fact, I have a vintage copy downstairs. He co-founded the ongoing Hackers Conference and was involved with the launch of Well, a pioneering online service started in 1985. He's written a number of books, as well as he's the current co-chair of the Long Now Foundation, which is building a clock in a mountain that will tick for 10,000 years. About his new book, which he's going to discuss with Matt today, I will let Matt and Kevin kind of get to the gist of the project. But on his 68th birthday, Kevin began to write down for his young adult children some things he's learned in life and wish he'd known earlier. He's now decided to share that information with us in Excellent Advice for Living, Wisdom I'd Wish I'd Known Earlier. It's aimed primarily for young people, but speaks to all ages, myself included. I am not young. And so we're going to talk about that today. Please feel free to ask some advice. Also, I hope he's tossing some out. But before we begin, a pitch for Alta. If you've never heard of us, we are a quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. Alta Live is the digital interview series we do here that expands upon stories, articles, subjects from the magazine. You can join us as a member for as little as $3 a month. We feature weekly talks like this, a monthly California book club. In fact, next week, we're welcoming Percival Everett as our guest. We're award-winning, we're fabulous, we're about 6 years old. If you don't know us, I do hope that you will check us out. You can visit us at altaonline.com. This interview will be recorded, so don't worry, it'll be posted to altaonline.com as well. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions of our guests. Matt and Kevin will chat for about 30 minutes, and then I will come back and ask some questions on your behalf. So we will send you an email with links, where to buy the book, where to read. You can read, actually, Kevin's done interviews in our magazine before, and where to watch this video again. That will all come in an email to you later this afternoon. And I love seeing people chime in the chat where they're tuning in from. Hi, Inner Sunset, Santa Rosa, Paris, Marina, California. I'm in Nevada, and now turning this over to Matt in Oakland. Take care.
Thank you, Beth. Good advice would be subscribe to Alta. But Kevin, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about this. I want to ask right off the bat, who has given you the best advice in your life?
I think the best advice that I have learned from the people I worked with, one, Stuart Brand, who is the legendary founder of the Whole Earth catalog, where I worked and later took over. And he taught me how to say no. And the proper way to say no is not to give reasons. Is to the most politely gentle way of just saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And here's the little trick, a little bit of advice, is that he always made it seem like it was a favor to you, because it was like, I can't give it my full attention, and I would be, I would be destroying whatever it was if I said yes. And so it was he was doing you a favor by saying no in a very, very polite way, and making it seem like it was in your interest that he says no. And that was really, really handy going through life with lots of decisions to have to make. I'm learning how to say no politely.
And probably invitations that you probably...
And all kinds of things. it just was liberating.
Yeah. Have you always been receptive to people's advice? Sometimes it's hard to take advice.
Um, I'm receptive to little tiny proverbs and the distillation that's starting with the Gospels, and Jesus's sayings, and then the proverbs in the Bible, and the kinds of things from Confucius. I always was attracted to those bits because it enabled me to remember them, to repeat them to myself, to try and change my behavior. So in that sense, I wasn't like, I didn't read the advice columns.
Sure.
That didn't really work for me because they were just kind of stories, anecdotal. What worked were these little pithy mind grenades that would rattle in my brain over and over again. And I kind of collected those in a certain sense. I did pay attention to those.
Yeah. So tell me about how you collected them, because the book has, I don't know how many, but many hundred perhaps aphorisms and bits of advice. How did you write them? Did you just do them as they occurred to you, or did you have a certain time of day or a process?
So there are 450 of them, and the first set I put out on my 68th birthday, and I
68 pieces of advice.
Yes,
right?
and I started
Yeah.
to write them down, not knowing how many I could make, in a very deliberate attempt to try and say, what do I know that I want to tell my kids? And as I went along, I said, I think I can get 68 out of this.
And you sat down and wrote them straight, just
Yeah,
like,
I just
wow.
sat down and kind of try and write them down. Like, what do I know that, and then beyond that, I began then to more seriously work on trying to, I did it for the next couple of years, kind of towards my birthday. Again, I would sit down and try and write them. And then by the third year, I was kind of collecting them during the year as I thought about them. But that was just the first draft. And then once I had the first draft, it was like poetry. My assignment was to compress them, to take out half the words, to rewrite them, to really make them in some ways be little kind of tweets almost. I was trying to compact an entire book of wisdom into a single sentence. And so
did you give yourself constraints like word limit or?
Not like 120 characters.
Yeah.
I didn't do that. I just was saying the usual thing that I like to do as an editor, which is, can I remove any of these words and it'll still make sense, and maybe even make better sense? And I would just go over and over, or can I restate this in some ways where I can lose a couple of words? And I really was kind of really trying to optimize the compression of this, and clarity. I mean, those are my two things: compression, clarity. Compression, clarity. Does it work? And that's in some ways my main mode as an editor of magazines, was that kind of compression and clarity.
And so as you were compiling all these and writing them, did you find that you were thinking differently about yourself and your experiences? And did it change how you saw your life?
No, I can't say that it changed my life.
It's a lot of introspection, though, to think about that stuff.
Right? And that's another what I want to call criteria that I used on this, that I applied, which was, do I really believe this? I mean, this sounds nice, this sounds good, but do I really believe it? Do I really live it? Is this really from me? And that introspection was a necessary part of it. I think what maybe changed is that, so I eventually, we made a book. There's 450 of these, and I did give it to my children, and my son, who's the only one that I know who's read it yet, said, I asked him, okay, well, I know people are going to ask, what did you think about it? And so he said, well, I didn't, we never heard these before, but you did live them. And so, so that act of articulating the thing that we were trying to teach, I think, in terms of changing your life, I think I had more clarity about what it was that I was doing. And so maybe that will help me going further. I always joke that, having done a number of books, that the best time to write a book is a year after the book has been published and you've been talking about it for a year.
Right.
Then you really know what the book is about. I have a little bit of that sense right now, that
Yeah.
now I know what I was doing in the past.
But it's interesting what your son said. It's kind of like the best way to give advice is just to embody it and just to kind of live it.
Right. Yeah. And we did that. We were the opposite of helicopter parents. We were
Submarine parents.
although that's a great term. Submarine. We were always there, but not around.
Right. Just peeking up the periscope, making sure
yeah.
everyone was okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so and we didn't preach very much. And so, but hopefully we did model it, and that seemed to have worked. But I do think, and here's the difference, the subtitle of "Wish I'd Known Earlier," I do think that I wished I had encountered these before when I was earlier, because I think it would have helped. And
Yeah.
I think if we could have handed our kids this book, particularly the book that I wrote 20 years ago, I think it would have been better if we had been able to articulate that.
So how do you think a reader should access this book? Do we just randomly open it, or should we read it straight through? Should we look at it in times of trouble?
I think of these as reminders. And what I'm imagining is that you do maybe not read the whole thing at once, but you do return to it. And that's, I say that because I wrote these as a way for me to return to them as reminders. They're encapsulated so that we have a little handle so you can pick them up, so that you can hold them and recall them or memorize them even. And so I see these as reminders that need to be reminded. There's a saying that, not mine and not in the book, which was that everything important has already been said, but nobody was listening, so we need to say it again. And so I think there's a little bit of that. And also it's very obvious to most people that the same advice can be meaningless to you, and then in another season, another year,
Sure.
time of your life, you can suddenly be meaningful. So re-encountering them is what I'm imagining, that it's easy enough to dip into and out, whether random or even to read it all the way through. And I think this idea of kind of revisiting and rereading and recalling is, for me, I think the best mode.
So do you think people need advice now more than they did in the past? It seems like people are searching for something online and through self-help books. Is there a lack of direction that people are kind of seeking advice for?
If you go to the bookstore, you'll see that there's entire walls of self-help and advice, and so to speak. And so I don't think that there's a lack of general advice. What I'm hoping to do is to distill it, because lots of people very correctly understand that the best way to talk about anything is to tell a story. I'm not a born storyteller. I like to write telegraphic little manifestos and things. And so this is for a different maybe rhythm or mode or set of people who don't want to read a lot of books and hear a lot of stories, who just want it kind of, just tell me the punchline, just tell me the end, just give it to me in this tweet. And that's what this is. So I don't think there's a lack of advice, but there may be a lack of advice that is in this current vernacular.
Yeah.
Just something that's, can go viral.
The virality question, and also like you mentioned tweets earlier, it did occur to me that these were perfectly formed for the way that people are digesting information now. They're kind of just like you said, like mind grenades. They just kind of come at you really fast, have a direct impact. Was that intentional all through the way you were writing it?
It was intentional, although I wasn't thinking necessarily of tweets. It was just that I knew that worked on me. Yeah. And I collect quotes of other types of little quotes that people have said, things that have a little surprise in them, that are maybe not as obvious, and that little joy of, I mean, it's almost kind of variety of poetry in some sense, that or something that is compressible like that. There is a pleasure that I have in that, and I was trying to replicate that. I only realized later on that they were tweetable when when somebody took my list and someone else, not me, made a little tweet bot that was tweeting one a day.
Oh, an advice bot.
Yeah, it was like, this is perfect. I had not even thought of that. And so actually there were several that were doing that. And so I said, oh yeah, it's perfectly for tweets. And so that but the general dynamics of this, of kind of reducing this to something that could be conveyed and transmitted very easily, was in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, does it have to be in a book? You know, I was, as I was looking, I was thinking of those Brian Eno oblique stratagem
Right.
cards. Like, this could have been delivered in lots of different ways, whether
Right.
it's random cards or a bot that puts out advice every day. Tell me why it's in a book and why that was important for you to have it be
Right.
in that form.
So it actually began online. It was I first posted these on my blog, and they did go viral as a list. And then there was the tweet bot that was doing very well. So I would say, in a certain sense, it's not a native. It actually is more digital native than a book. But the reason and the handiness of the book is that there is also, it's like a different media. There is also some advantage to have everything together, where you don't have to, spend it 360 or 4 days a year to see.
Right.
You can put them together, and there is something that works with the serendipitous association between them. I really like that thing that your brain does when it takes two things that don't appear to be connected, and you read them in order, and suddenly your brain is making these connections that are not explicit, but you're doing it, you're subconsciously sometimes. And so I think that is another variety, another valid genre, is to put it in a book between covers, to make it handy to have that kind of full experience. It doesn't take away from the fact that there's another life, there's another species that can live online.
Were you conscious of making them kind of speak to each other or counterpoint each other as they were editing it together?
I edited them as if it was a magazine. And so as you guys know, making a magazine, there's sequencing and arranging is a large part of the presentation. And there's all kinds of things that you're trying to account for as you do it. Variety, pacing, logical stuff. And, what I know about magazines, because I was a total magazine junkies, is, and I don't know if I'm not that exceptional, but I always read magazines from the back.
Huh.
A lot of people would start at the beginning and go, no, I was always reading them backwards. I don't know why. That's how.
So you would read like the reviews in the back or the humor piece, and then.
Yeah, I would just start in the back, and so the last thing I would ever read was the letter from the editor.
Well, you were the only person who probably ever read those anyway. So
yeah, right. So, but this idea of, like, again, when you're editing things, I don't assume necessarily that people are going to start at the beginning. I assume coming in at different places and angles, and so, but there is a sense of, what's going on in the sequence, what's the variety, how does one, if you read one, how would that affect the next? So there's 5 or 6 different dynamics that I would pay attention to if I was editing a magazine, that I'm paying attention to in editing this sequence.
Yeah. So here I want to kind of shift a little bit into talking about technology, since you're a technologist and a evangelist for things technical. And also, I think that it does dovetail. We're in this moment of AI and people talking about how huge AI is going to be in changing things. Could I feed this into ChatGPT and feed the collected works of Kevin Kelly and get some advice from a machine that you hadn't thought of yourself? Is that possible?
Not only is it possible, it's already been done by
But what about the amazing life experiences that you had that made the advice possible?
Right. Yeah. So I just learned of a new way of summarizing, like, say, the chat GPTs, which is what you're talking about. Is that what those things are? They're optimized for plausibility rather than accuracy. And so what you would get is plausible advice. It's kind of like the average. And it wouldn't be necessarily wrong. And it might sound a lot like me, and it might, be derived from other things that I said or even channeled myself. But having tried it so far, it's unlikely to actually produce anything that I would use.
Uh-huh.
Right. And so it's it and we're jumping ahead here, but I think of these as universal personal interns. So this is the intern. So the intern's writing more of these, and the intern is unlikely to get one that I would actually use unedited, unimproved, but
Sure.
they might produce something that would help me write a different one that I hadn't thought of or wouldn't thought of myself. So they're really good in that capacity of taking something all the way to completion that's very, very plausible, but usually so far not something you can use right off the shelf. And that's been true of my daily image making with the AIs, is that yeah, you can get them to do an image right away, but it's intern work. You
Right.
really release it that way. It's embarrassing, but it is really good and to work with. And so I may spend several hours trying to get this to get somewhere that is really kind of new and more like me. And so with their help together, we can. But as a standalone, you get, a good enough variety, a good enough version. And people have already done that.
I like the idea of rebranding AI as the artificial intern
Yeah.
because I mean, it's all due respect to interns. But you do need to help it, I guess. It's not able to do it on its own.
Well, it's
But
not able to do great stuff on its own. It can do good stuff, good enough
yeah.
stuff, but it
But I
can't.
wanted to circle back to the
Yeah.
life experience thing, which
Good.
is, you've traveled a lot, you've met a lot of people, you've had experiences. All of that went into your advice giving.
Yes.
The bot cannot have any of that just by definition, right? It hasn't seen the things you've seen. It hasn't met the people you've met. How could it presume to even speak to people?
Well, that's not really fair, because in some ways it's met more people than I have, because it has basically read everything that
Yeah.
all the people that I've met and beyond have written. So it does have access to all of that. What it has, again, what it's producing though is the most plausible and likely thing to say rather than the improbable. And
Yeah.
that's sort of what I was always trying to go for a little bit in these, was to have it be a slightly unexpected, to slightly not the most plausible thing. And that's where these new AIs don't reach what we can do, is because they are been trained on everything that has been, which is sort of like the wisdom of the crowd, average. It's the most plausible thing that the most plausible human would do or say. And for that, it's amazing. But what we seek is not the most plausible. We think it's plausible is just sort of the beginning. We went plausible plus the unexpected. We went plausibly unexpected. And so that's something that currently can't do. I'm not saying they'll
Yeah,
never.
that's the human factor, right? Is
Right.
the quirkiness, the unexpected, the slant. How do you maintain your optimism about so much stuff? I know that you're pretty positive, and there aren't a lot of optimistic things going on right now, as far as I see. How do you maintain your positive outlook?
It helps to have a long view.
Yeah.
The longer view, the past you have, the more real our current progress is. You realize that as bad and as many problems we had more in the past.
Sure.
And that if you have a choice about what year you could live in, but not a choice about who you were born in, what kind of body, what race, what caste, whatever, you'd be crazy to choose a year in the past to live, because this is the best time so far. And so that's good for now. And so as we look forward, it's possible this all could stop all of a sudden tomorrow, but all the conditions that have produced it in the past are still working. So statistically, just rationally and logically, the evidence suggests that we'll continue to muddle through. And for me, that's the first one, is that progress is real. So it's just, scientifically, rationally, the evidence all suggests it's real, and then it should continue. The second one is that I embrace, in a certain sense, the problem. So I'm not looking towards utopia. I have no desire to live in a utopia, and it's impossible as in addition. So I call it protopia, where we're going to have a lot of problems, but what we want is just a few percent more good than bad, and that few percent compounded over time is civilization, and what I call protopia. So that's the second reason, which is like, we're not looking for a world without problems. And the third thing I would say is, I am optimistic as I look around the world and everything, not because I think our problems are smaller than we think or less significant, but because I think our capacity to solve them is growing even faster. And so that's where I rest, in taking the longer view, knowing that even with a few percent compounded over time, that allows us to overcome even fairly large setbacks, which there will be. And there will be new problems created by the technologies, which have to be solved, not with less technology, but with better technology. And so for me, my optimism comes from a sense of history, a sense of trusting in the general fact that people produce and want to produce more good than bad, and that we're often blind to how fast our ability to solve problems is growing.
Yeah. So do you still write down advice for your
I
birthday?
do. In fact, I've been tweeting advice around my birthday this year that people think is from the book, but they actually were written after the book. So they're actually all new.
So my advice is, think about a sequel. Maybe we have a second volume to this book, and we can have you back on to talk about it.
Yeah, that's a very generous thought. That's the first anybody has suggested that. I'll pin it on you. But let me just, if I may, just tell you my favorite bit of advice from the book.
Please.
So again, I'm mostly channeling things that I've heard from the Stoics and the Bible and Confucius, the Zens and the Sufis, as well as modern day authors. And I've tried to put everything in my own words, but I can't guarantee that, although I did have people try and fact check. So what I would say, my favorite piece of advice is, don't aim for being the best. That's a very small, being number one is a really tiny little niche that you're unlikely to get to. Instead, aim to be the only. And
All
the
right.
only allows there to be millions of different niches, tens of millions, everybody with their own unique mixture. We have our own faces that are different, and our own mix of talents and geniuses and experiences, which all go into it. And what we want to be doing is kind of moving in that direction. It's not a destination. It'll take all your life to even get close to it. And it's a high bar, but you can move in that direction. And the reward for that is that, on the day before you die, you could say, I have truly become myself. And I think that's the kind of a goal that is really great to aim for.
Let a billion onlys bloom.
Right, exactly.
Well, I'm going to bring back my one and only colleague, Beth, who has some questions from our audience.
I sure do. Also,
And you're the best, Beth. You're the only and the best.
boy, I don't want to be the best. I'm not going to aspire to be the best anymore. It's a load off my shoulders.
Well, it is. I tell you,
it is kind of a relief.
You're just, instead of trying to kind of like, imagine if you wanted to be like a major league basketball star, that's a very tiny, crowded niche. And that's basically someone else's movie that you're trying to join. You want to be able to, what I also say is, you want to invent a new definition of success. All right, that's what you want to do. You want to invent your own definition of success, to be the only. But I interrupted you. Go ahead, Beth.
Well, not to not ask people's questions, but that is kind of interesting. You know, you co-founded Wired. I mean, an incredibly successful still magazine. Were you aspiring to make the best magazine?
No, that's the whole point, was that when we started Wired, there was no category. People had no idea what it was. It was a very hard sell to advertisers. It's like, what is this thing? It's like a tech magazine. They wanted to do technology advertising. No, we were saying this is a lifestyle magazine. They say a lifestyle. Yeah, it's the technology lifestyle. There was no such thing. It was very, very confusing to people because it was so weird and confusing to advertisers. I think readers kind of got it right away because there was no competition. And for the first decade, almost 2 decades, Wired had no competition. That's another advantage of being the best. I mean, being the only versus the best is that you don't have competition at that point because you're out there, you're the only. And so that idea of making Wired kind of like unique in that sense was much more in our minds than trying to make it the best.
All right, questions from the crowd. Christy asks, when did you know you were a writer and or had something to say, knew the power of your own voice?
That's a really good question because I still really don't think of myself as a writer. I'm much more a born editor. I write under duress and reluctantly and painfully and only in desperation. Going back to the only, at the Wired, we'd have story meeting ideas and I would be pitching ideas I had, trying to find a writer to take it up or other editors to kind of, you know, endorse it or approve of it. And there would be many ideas I just could not get anybody to think were very good. So I would try and kill them off and then make them go away. But maybe a year later, they'd come back and I think it's a really good idea. We should do it and find someone, no takers. And then maybe the third year, they might come back again. And I would begin to say, oh, I get it. I have to write that. I can't get any, I think it's a great idea. I really think it's good, but I can't get anybody else to do it. So I'm going to write that. And at that point, it's really easy because there was no competition. I wasn't in a hurry to do it because I've been trying to sell it give it away. They couldn't do it. So this was like, oh, I have to do it. And so those were the best ones. They were the best ones because like nobody's going to do that. There was just nothing else. And I've been trying to give it away for years. So I think that's what I would end up writing is if I can't find someone else to do it. It's like, this is a really great idea. I would have fun doing it. It'd be good. Maybe I get paid for it, but could anybody else do it? If yes, good. I don't have to do that one. So I'm going to do the ones that basically I can't give away.
Were you, I mean, even as a kid, were you coming up with these ideas? I mean, did you have a sense of, I'm an ideas guy?
Well, it wasn't ideas, but I did have just in high school, I did a newsletter and my dad worked for magazines. I was a magazine junkie. So I started doing newsletters. One of the first jobs I got when I was traveling was putting out a newsletter. And then my first real job was working at Whole Earth, putting out a magazine. So I was definitely thinking in terms of magazines. And again, it wasn't the writing part. It was the putting it together. It was the presentation. It was taking all the images. It was doing the magazine newsletter thing. So I would write if there was space or if there was needed or if I couldn't find someone to write it. So that was something that I had done from the very beginning. But writing, and also even today, as you can tell from this book, I don't like to write a lot. I don't type very fast. I'd like the short thing. You know, I was doing reviews at Whole Earth. There were a paragraph. That's my speed. There's a little paragraph, a little bit, something telegraphic. Even when I write longer, I still write pretty telegraphic. And so I work with writers. I work with people who love to write and they're really good at it. And the more words I make, the happier they are. That's not me. I like to have as few words as possible.
Can you share any favorite literary magazines or online sites? What do we not know about? What aren't we reading that we should be?
Okay, that's a good question. Most of my fiction I consume audibly. I audit it. I listen. I don't really have the right patience or the aptitude for reading a lot of fiction. So I prefer to be read to. Most of my reading is nonfiction, if not even technical, like at the level of papers and things. And so I would say something that we're not doing enough of is actually reading the original source material. I was reading a number of books that had the eyewitness accounts of several things, of like Cortez's conquest of Mexico, which was just illuminating. I had no idea there was so much from both sides, both the Aztec side as well as the Spaniard side, of what that was and what that involved. It was just amazing to get the eyewitness accounts of that. And then been reading the eyewitness accounts and stuff about the Magellan explorations, the age of exploration, and all these Europeans going around the world and hearing what the actual, at that time, understanding of it was. So that's kind of like source material. And I think whether it's in science or whether it's in history, we should be reading more of the source materials if we can, because that really changes our view when we see those source materials.
Last question, as we have gone over, you have 450 pieces of advice in this new book. And again, everyone, we're going to send you the links. You can all buy it and read, marinate on all 450. Do you find yourself ever shooting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and saying, oh my God, I left out super important one? Will there be a part 2? I mean, you've got, decades left.
Yeah.
And more to learn.
This is the second person pushing you on a sequel here, Kevin. You got to do it.
I'm getting
the crowds want it.
I'm getting it. Yeah. The fans demand it. That's the honest truth. If the fans demand it, then I suppose there would be. I have surprised myself that I can keep producing these. And, but, as I said, I have to really feel that I believe it and feel strongly about it, and that it's somewhat practical. That's another criteria. Is like, I don't want to say something too obvious. I want to say something that could actually help someone's behavior, change their behavior, get them to do something differently. So if there is one, I suspect it'll be kind of a long coming. It's not going to happen next year or the year after. But I continue to write them. And so one could always hope for that.
Okay, we've actually gotten this question twice now, so I will ask it. Do you meditate?
I don't very often. I occasionally find that it's nice because of the situation. So I know how to do the beginner's level of meditation, but I've never meditated or really taken drugs because I'm just naturally high.
Really?
Yeah.
You've always been just...
Yeah, I've always been that. I've been around. I was a hippie. I was one of the few hippies that never took any drugs at all. And it was just, everybody around me was like, yeah, I'm there. I'm at your vibe, but I have a very natural centeredness and calmness that meditation. So I do it, but it doesn't really, it doesn't change me that much. So it's like, okay, asleep. I have a superpower, which is my ability to sleep. I'm a robot. I'll lay down and turn off, and then
That's a dad thing. All dads can do that. So superpower.
Well, I'm a super dad. Okay.
You clearly wrote a book with advice for your kids.
Yeah.
On that note, I thank you so much, Kevin Kelly. This was really, really fun. And of course, my wonderful colleague, Matt Haber. Thank you both for this conversation. Folks, before you bounce, I do want to invite you next week. We are welcoming Mike the poet. Mike Sonkson is a poet, a professor, a Los Angeles enthusiast. He's joining us. That's May 17th at 12:30 p.m. here at Alta Live. Again, we'll send you links to all of this, and go buy Kevin's book. Thanks
yes, so and another shout out for Alta. I only get 2 paper magazines in my life these days, Wired and Alta. So
wow.
Yes, only 2 paper magazines left, and there was
we're not the only, but we're
not
trying.
The only, you're very close. Almost.
Unfortunately.
Anyway,
thanks, Kevin.
You guys are great. Thank you for hosting me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
So fun. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
All righty. Bye-bye.